When Doom was released on the Saturn in March of 1997, it was met with a mountain of negative press. Pretty much every magazine that reviewed it hammered the poor performance, giving the platform yet another black eye in the zeitgeist of public opinion. It was well deserved too. What should have been a great running and looking custom engine showing off the Saturn's hardware ended up being an unoptimized mess of id Software's original PC code. Since that time, we have learned that it was none other than John Carmack himself that was responsible for the torpedo that sunk the hopes of Saturn fans everywhere. He insisted that id Software, the developers of the Saturn version, not use a custom engine because he didn't like the way it looked. It's a story you'll hear again and again, and just one of the many that define the hardships of Sega's flagship 32-bit offering. Lost among that disappointment was the fact that just a few days after Doom was released, Hexen Beyond Heretic also made its way to the Saturn. This port was developed by a small Swedish developer who was primarily known for their Commodore Amiga and Mega Drive games. While Hexen shared a great many design elements with Doom, it was at its heart a much different experience. In this episode, we will take a look at it, see how the porting job went, and talk a bit about why labeling it a Doom clone really shortchanged the gameplay. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Hexen for the Sega Saturn. Upon first inspection, you might be thinking Hexen is just Doom with magic. I wouldn't blame you for thinking that because the original was built on the same engine, so it shares a number of visual similarities. Many don't know it, but this was actually a sequel to the 1994 release, Heretic, hence the subtitle, and the second in an overall trilogy that ended with Hexen 2. Like Heretic, the story here revolves around the battle to stop one of the chaos-sowing Serpent Riders. This time the evil Korax. He aims to corrupt and destroy the human world of Hexen, and only you can stop him. You actually get a choice here of who gets the honor to take on the challenge. There is a warrior, a mage, and a cleric, all with different attributes, weapons, and each are affected differently by the items within the game. Hexen is divided up by hubs, which connect to a series of sub-levels. You can freely travel among these different sub-levels, which is often required to solve puzzles, collect items, and defeat enemies in order to move forward. That means you'll need to do some exploring, backtracking, and really pay attention to your surroundings in order to get anywhere. Once you select your character class, you'll notice a radically different gameplay style between them. The warrior relies mainly on close combat weapons, speed, and brute strength. Because you have to get in the enemy's faces most of the time in order to fell them, he also has the better armor, so he can take more damage. The mage is the exact opposite. He fights with magic from a distance and is extremely weak in close quarters. The cleric is sort of a combination of the two. He has a good mix of both close and distance attacks, giving you more variety than either of the other two classes. You must also take into account the jumping ability of the classes. The warrior can jump the furthest and has easier access to some areas than the other two. It sounds like a small thing at first, but it does play into the non-linear stage design quite a bit. Weapons vary greatly between the classes, and many use mana, which are represented by the blue and green bars you see on the heads-up display. Weapons use one or both types of mana, depending on the character. There are also tons of items and artifacts that you can collect in your journey. It starts with simple things to replenish life, help you see better in the dark, and increase your armor rating. The more potent artifacts allow you to fly, teleport enemies, and the hilariously named Porculator allows you to turn enemies into pigs. The visuals of Hexen are very similar to other early first-person shooters. Everything is very pixelated up close and enemies are simple 2D sprites. But Hexen is still an attractive overall engine considering its age. There is a ton more going on here than anything in Doom, and the engine has nice touches like being able to break glass, leaves blowing in the wind, and being able to interact with things in the environment. Hexen had originally been released on PC in 1995, so nearly 2 years had passed before it showed up on the Saturn. This meant that instead of being judged on its own merits, it was often compared to contemporary engines like Turok, Quake, and Doom 64, all of which were quite a bit more advanced. But the Saturn port was not a lost cause. While it did have some performance issues in the larger areas, it ran much better than the Doom port overall, and managed to look better as well. The biggest issue many of you will likely have with the engine is its age. Even on the same platform, 3D engines had really begun to take hold, giving us impressively huge stages, great looking lighting effects, and 3D models for the weapons and enemies. Hexen suffered from 2D models that weren't animated all that great, and the Saturn version only showed you the front of the sprite at all times. To make matters worse, Lobotomy Software had been doing work on the same hardware. Power Slave was better looking, better running, and had more dynamic gameplay. But Hexen was still a game that deserved some praise for its visuals. Whereas most developers dropped the ball entirely on Saturn conversions, this was not a terrible looking or running experience most of the time. It certainly held up well next to the PlayStation release and was far from the ugliest game in the genre. One area where Hexen gets little love is its soundtrack. There are some great mood pieces here. A lot of this stuff is haunting and really makes you feel uneasy while you're exploring. There's a good mix of it too. Some tracks are low-key and some quite energetic. Let's listen to a few and see what you think. If you read anything about the console ports of Hexen from that era, you will see countless comparisons to Doom. You'll hear, it's not as good as Doom, it lacks Doom's intensity, the backtracking sucks, and you get lost easy. These comparisons are a complete joke. Hexen is not a raw Doom clone. It never was. Hexen is built upon the same engine, but it's not just about blasting enemies and finding an exit. This world must be explored. Puzzles must be solved, and your character class greatly determines how all this comes to pass. It's easy to wade into the horde with a warrior and bash everything to death, but the mage must play it safer, smarter, and with a completely different set of weapons. Traps are everywhere, items and artifacts are hidden away quite well, and can change the entire direction of the game once you get them. There's a depth and complexity here that goes far beyond Doom's gameplay. It really does equal an entirely different feeling adventure. Of course that means it's not going to be for everyone. You go in expecting to run around and wreak havoc like you did in Doom, and the frustration of death and being lost within the huge levels will quickly send you to the power button for a different game. This is a non-linear, long-haul journey that is more akin to Power Slave than it is Doom. The weapons are also far different from most other first-person shooters. There are no missiles and shotguns in this one. You'll either be bashing enemies with axe and hammers, or you'll be nailing them across the screen with magical wands and staff. Expectation will play a huge role in your enjoyment here. If you've got Doom on your brain, I promise you a bad time. Go in wanting a unique adventure that takes time and effort, and you might just find this well worth playing. It will also be of note to many of you that this game uses both passwords and save games depending on your tolerance. I say that because this uses an obscene amount of save space. So large are the files, the Saturn does not have enough internal memory to save, forcing you to use a memory cartridge. But even then it's just crazy. A save game uses 3,801 blocks. That's right, Saturn fans, a save game here uses almost half an external memory card. I hate to say it, but passwords here are almost mandatory. There is a lot to unpack with old Hexen here. While it most certainly is a product of its time, it took some bold steps to separate itself from other first-person shooters on the market at the time. The level progression, character classes, and weapons really set it apart from Doom and its ilk. If you like a more open journey that challenges your mind as well as your reflexes, this is a good one to take on. The Saturn port here is a bit rough around the edges visually, but nowhere near as bad as how Doom ended up. Though it's ugly in modern terms, it runs better and has more varied locations than Doom, which is not to be taken lightly considering the lack of good games in the genre the Saturn suffered. The best thing you can do for yourself is to understand that this is not a Doom clone in the strictest sense of the term. It plays almost nothing like it once things get started. In order to enjoy this, you will play it with more caution and have to understand that backtracking and exploration are an absolute must to defeat it. While I still find this version playable, there is no question there are better ways to get to it today. The PC edition runs lightning fast and the Nintendo 64 version wasn't bad itself. I still recommend you give the Saturn port a go if you enjoy firing up games on Sega's old workhorse. It was an interesting conversion that has aged out quite a bit, but was better on Saturn than I expected, particularly after the awful Doom port. My hat's off to anyone who has legitimately seen the ending. Those that enjoy big challenges will absolutely love it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.